Welcome to First Coast Forum, an in-depth discussion about important issues affecting our community. First Coast Forum is a service of Cox Radio Jacksonville.
Hello and welcome to First Coast Forum, our weekly public affairs program that focuses on the local issues that matter to you. I'm your host, Tiffany Griffith, and today we're discussing growth management and development on the First Coast. Today, my guest is Stephen Dare from Metro Jacksonville. You can find his informative website at metrojacksonville.com. Welcome to the show, Stephen.
Hey, Tiffany. How are you doing?
I'm doing very well. All right, now we have a number of topics that you brought for us to discuss for today, and we want to hit all of them. Suburban sprawl, urban cores, urban decay, white flight. Why have redevelopment efforts failed? What is the cost of unmanaged growth? I also want to get with you on a number of issues involving our new mayor, like how far he's done so far and how you think he'll be doing in the future, especially with his planned budget cuts to get Jacksonville back to work, as they say. So let's start off with the top issue there, suburban sprawl. What are we seeing?
All right. Well, first of all, this whole issue of development and managed growth, it sounds like the least sexy thing since a traffic accident. And actually, it has so much to do with your quality of life that it's one of the most profound things that we should be paying attention to that we're just totally not, because people start talking about tax issues and municipal bonds, and you immediately want to go to sleep, maybe die. But it's a very important issue. Suburban sprawl. People in this country are angry about waste of money and the unbelievably crippling cost of government. And they point to things like Solyndra, or they point to things like, welfare fraud. But the real money, the real waste in this country comes from the local level. People are angry about the fact that there's not enough money to build schools for their kids, that there is not enough recreation, that their streets aren't working, that their electric bills are so high, and that comes from suburban sprawl. Because the money that we have to invest in the infrastructure to support this sprawl form of development is staggering. For example, do you realize that every time you go up on one of those overpasses off of JTB, that's $50 million. $50 million for every single one of those overpasses. And do you know what you could do in the high school system? If you have $50 million a year to spend, just divide it up, $1 million for each of the 50 high schools in Duval County. What do you think would be the increase in education? And so suburban sprawl is always at the top of my list, because we never factor into our considerations of how our lives work the amount of money that the taxpayers have to foot in order to support suburban sprawl.
And it seems like we're at a point right now where we have too many issues on our plate that we really need to address all at once. And like you said, we don't just look at the local level. We also have to look at the state level and see where our tax dollars are being placed. Mm-hmm. But the answer that a lot of our lawmakers are giving is cut taxes, cut spending, cut spending. And where do we put the money and where do we get the money? Yeah,
because that's just crazy talk. And it's understandable crazy talk, because when you're faced with the type of crippling bills that we have in order to support our basic way of life, you panic and you look for, how do I fix this now? But this is going to be a long-term solution. It took us a long time to get to where we are. And the suburban sprawl movement was planned. It was legislated. We wanted to come here to where we are spending $1 billion a year on highway maintenance. And we seem to have forgotten and lost our way somewhere over the past 5 decades of this suburbanized model of growth. So cutting services and cutting our quality of life is not the answer. Cutting this unbelievable, expensive infrastructure, this is the answer. Tiffany, say you have 100 people. Right? And you put those 100 people along, 20 houses along a mile of road, right? So it's 5 people per house. You can see how this would work. 100 people could live on a mile of road. You know how much it costs to maintain a mile of road a year?
How much?
$1 million for each mile. In maintenance, once you average it out, that's how much it costs. You can build one school. It handles all of the kids in that neighborhood. You have 2 lights because there's only 2 intersections. You don't have to have gigantic signs because everything's within walking distance. Not everybody has to have a car because you can walk a mile. You don't have to build any more than 1 fire department, 1 police department. right? Very sustainable. Now, what happens when you take that same 100 families with the same incomes that they have and you stretch them along 20 miles of road? Now those families have to spend 20 times the amount in infrastructure maintenance just on the roads. They have to build out all of that sewage. They have to build another high school. They have to build 2 police stations. There have to be 2 fire stations. There now has to be lights going all the way down that road. You have to pay for the overhead expenses like street traffic lights and signals and signs and stop signs. There's no additional revenue to pay for that. But now you have all of this expense simply because you took what could be fit into 1 mile and you've stretched it out over 10 miles or over 20 miles, or in some cases over 40 miles.
I think the general belief is though that we're bringing all of these people to live here in Jacksonville. That's extra revenue. But are you saying basically we've kind of outgrown our ability to sustain this growth?
It was never sustainable. We did it. It was a very liberal move, starting, believe it or not, a century ago, where, very concerned, bleeding heart liberals went into the cities and they saw the poverty and the disease and the conditions of life in the 1890s, where you have streetcars and animals defecating on the streets, and there is no sewage drainage in the cities, and people are passing out from lack of oxygen at the first and second level floors of the cities because you have methane. I mean, the sickness, we can't even imagine that by today's standards. Their solution to that was to make it illegal to build that dense. And so they instituted what became the suburban movement. And that is to push people out to the suburbs in less dense conditions where everybody has an acre of land and you have healthy air. They never considered whether or not they would be able to pay for that long term. And so it's not just that we're bringing people here. We do not give in our society people a choice of where they want to build their home. If you want to build a new home, say you want to build homes for 20,000 people. You think you can fit them on the south side somewhere?
Not really.
Right. But do you think you can even fit 4,000 homes into the downtown under our current zoning and building codes?
Not at all.
It's illegal. Jacksonville in 1888, we had 60,000 people come every winter, and they lived and they partied and they played and they spent their money in the small area of downtown Jacksonville. Now, if you wanted 60,000 people to come live there for the winter, it would be a FEMA event. You'd have helicopters, there'd be like trailers set up everywhere, and the deaths would be in the tens of thousands.
So what would your top priorities be as far as handling urban sprawl here within the Jacksonville area?
Well, think of your quality of life. You live out in Mandarin. I've lived out in Bay Meadows, so, I'm not talking out of school here. But, you have to drive everywhere. You have to get up. You have to, get to the apartment, to the parking lot. Then you have to drive over to the strip mall. Then you have to, drive over to the next place. And the way that our streets and our homes and our society is designed now, if you think about why do you have these parking lots right on the street? Why do you have to walk a football field in order to go from one shopping center across the street through another football field to get to the front door of the next place, right? This is one of the downsides of suburban sprawl. You can't really live in the suburbs unless you're in a car, and everybody has to have a car. Mom's got to have one, the kids have got to have one, dad's got to have one. The wear and tear on the streets is terrific. But then you end up, if you have to drive everywhere, where do you hang out? How do you meet people? How do you have the benefit of living in the city if you're over off of San Jose? Where on Bay Meadows do you just casually run into 20 people that have similar interests to you? The quality of life created by the design of the suburbs is terrible. And it was only supportable when we had an urban core and a downtown that people went to, where you had the shopping and the restaurants and the culture. And we've taken that away. We've allowed that suburbanization to use up so much money that there's not enough money to cover the whole city. So then you have to start making choices, right? So what happens to the northwest side of town? Yeah, you get no drainage for 15 years. What happens to Springfield? We don't redo your streets for 60 years. What happens to the old part of the south side? Well, we're sorry your graveyards are collapsing in and there are bodies floating out in the water, but we just don't have enough money.
Oh, God, I hope that's not happening.
That is happening. It's happening in Mount Olive right now.
Ooh.
So this is we reached the point of unsustainability probably sometime in the 60s, and we're now dealing with that. And, it has a lot of implications. You make decisions based on race. You make decisions based on voting base. You make decisions based on who can afford to contribute to your campaign. And so instead of treating the city like a whole thing, you then have to make hard choices, and those hard choices have sociological impact. So what would I do? I would make sure that we go back to a way more simple and more capitalism-based form of development, where what makes a downtown, what makes a city work, is tens of thousands of people making their own decisions. And they create something that we now call a self-organizing system. The wisdom of the Jacksonville founders, when they created this beautiful diamond of a city on the river, compact, lively, the most progressive city in the United States of America. The wisdom of those people was they let it develop. They allowed for mixed use. People lived on the second floor. They had a shop on the first floor. They could walk down the street to every business they needed to go to. We've repackaged this old way of doing things, and now it has new names. We call it mixed use zoning, or we call it, sustainable zoning. But really, it's just a return to the traditional American values and the way that we used to do things. Personally, I think we need to scrap all of the permits that go out to the suburbs. That's me. I think we should go back, infill, change the law so the developers don't have to go through 300 days of red tape, bankrupting themselves in the process in order to put a residential tower downtown, which is what happened to Cameron Kuhn. I think that we need to go back to the earlier model of develop. It created cities for 4,000 years, and we're going to tinker with it.
And you said before that we need to go to a model where we let basically the thousands of people we could let inhabit downtown really make their own decisions. But from what we've seen in just the numerous years of trying to come up with a plan on what to do with downtown Jacksonville, the ideas of multiple people don't necessarily seem to be getting off the ground. And we only have about 2,000 people living in an area of downtown that really a true downtown should have 10 times that amount, if anything. But how do you get multiple people who have differing opinions on what to do with our downtown area to agree? Because some want to see development in downtown. Others say, leave it alone. Why are we putting money there? What's so special about downtown?
You know what? Metro Jacksonville is a planning site, and I am on the side of the people that say, let it alone. What killed the downtown wasn't all of the usual suspects. What killed the downtown was in 1972, we created a plan to create a community redevelopment. And that community redevelopment plan has now demolished 80% of the buildings downtown, leaving nothing behind, and turned downtown into basically one big, giant 4-pay parking lot in which you can go to 5 things. Well, that worked out. The problem isn't that they had too many people. The problem is that they restricted it. You got a blue ribbon panel, and it's architects and it's lawyers and it's people that own, muckety-muck businesses. And they're all swilling bourbon down there at the University Club. And one of them's like, well, I think over there we should have a district for a park. And regardless of whether or not the city wants a park or whether the businesses can support a park, they demolished everything between Ocean and Main Street from the AHL building over to State and Union Street. Now, it's all empty. It's a hell of a park, and that's where the homeless sleep. The problem is that you have less than 50 people making decisions that should be made by tens of thousands. So you want to know why downtown failed? Downtown failed because of the regulation. Where else do you have to pay for park? Where else in the city of Jacksonville do you have a parking lot? So you tell you, you've been here 30 minutes. It's time to get the heck out of downtown. If you took the policies of downtown Jacksonville and you exported them over to the St. John's Town Center, it would look like Raccoon City over there in 6 months. What do you think would happen to the town center if you were there for more than an hour, you got a $25 ticket? What do you think would happen if the police redirected all traffic away from the town center during football games? How about if you located all the homeless shelters in the parking lot of the town center and built the jail right next to it so that you release prisoners into the parking lot with no way to get home? Like, if you made all of the streets one way and you put tolls to get in, do you think the town center would survive?
Not at all.
But we did that to Jacksonville and only took us 50 years to kill it dead as crap.
So you're saying we definitely need to clean up a lot of those issues over there. But yeah, how do you get people who live from outside of downtown to buy into downtown, to want to come back to downtown?
Make it legal to live there. We have all of these buildings that can be converted over to lofts. We have so many spaces that can be built out. There's so much red tape. It is so much easier to build a building out in the suburbs, according to our new zoning laws, than it is to come back into the middle. We created this through legislation. Like, until we undo those legislative steps that created the toxic bubble of downtown Jacksonville, there's no amount. You can build hundreds of millions of dollars. And you know what? We proved it by spending $2 billion downtown for the most colossal failure in the United States of an urban area. You know, we are the only city that doesn't have a Starbucks.
Yes, I'm aware that there is no longer a Starbucks in downtown Jacksonville.
Muncie, Indiana has 2 Starbucks in their downtown.
I'm pretty sure they're nowhere near as large as us.
They have 60,000 people.
Okay.
And a lot of corn. I've been there. I lived there. I shucked the corn. They have 2 Starbucks. We have none.
All right. Well, I'm going to jump now into urban cores and urban decay, seeing as how that seems to be along the lines of where we're talking now.
Yeah, well, urban cores and urban decay, what caused that? Well, you know, if you don't know what caused the downtowns to fail, you don't have any possibility of fixing them. And so, you know, a lot of people say, well, it was the car. Well, the car created the suburbs. Yeah, that is completely ridiculous. Suburbs were created by zoning, and then they were given a hyper injection of like rocket fuel by the GI Bill. Because the GI Bill funded people to give mortgages to build houses with the proviso that they were in the suburbs. So the highways and the good roads that we have, you know, they weren't built for cars.
What were they built for?
Bicycles.
Uh-huh.
The good road movement in the United States established the roads with the smooth surfaces for bicycles. And the place that had the most bicycle roads in place with good smooth surfaces was Detroit, Michigan. It was only a matter of time before somebody figured out a motorized vehicle that could go over them. And my point is that we demonize the car as being the downfall of the downtowns, but it's the opposite. We destroyed the downtowns and we made the car absolutely necessary to our way of life. And we made it kind of sexy. I mean, you know, in a desert, you know, a beautiful like Mustang absolutely looks like something that you want to get into. And so we starved the interior of the cities in the 60s. And then led by people like Robert Moses, who is like the dark overlord of city planning from New York, he decided that the way to fix the slums was, instead of cleaning them up and rebuilding them, tear them down and build highways through the middle of them. And you would create regional cities by tearing down the core and making that a juncture for automobile traffic. So Jacksonville followed suit. We tore down some of the most historic neighborhoods in the city to create the Jacksonville Expressway, which became 95, but we were the first people to have a private expressway. 95, the interstate system didn't build that for us. We built it for them, and we gave it to them. So you've taken downtown, and you've cut it off with a major highway on 95. You've cut it off with major highways on State and Union. And then somewhere around the 70s, they decided that downtown had gotten too African American, and that if they were going to preserve the business environment of the downtown, that they needed to segregate it off from the black neighborhoods that surrounded it. So they created a system of one-way streets and actual physical blocks. They cut right through the middle of Pearl Street and put FCCJ as a block on the north side. And if you notice, you cannot go from downtown to any of the African-American neighborhoods surrounding downtown, like Springfield, unless you go up to where La Villa is or back to where East Jacksonville was And then you can cross over from what was a black neighborhood at that time to a black neighborhood at that time. Well, now times have changed. No one remembers what those roads were done for or why those blocks were done. And so you get caught in downtown where everything's a one-way street and you have tons of parking, nothing to do. And we have completely killed our downtown as a mixture of cupidity, racism, and just bad decision making. We thought we were going to double in size every 20 years. And that was the big push all the way through the 60s. We got to start building, or we're going to be left behind. Nobody was interested in making it work for the entire city. And they weren't interested in planning, not when you could get the taxpayers to subsidize your freaking road out to the suburbs and the boondocks, throw up those clapboard houses, make a decent profit, and move on to the next thing. And this is what we have. And this is what we're left with. We're left with no center. Why are our best and brightest, why do they have to leave town? Why is there no center to our culture? Why is there no place that celebrates the remarkable history of the city? We destroyed that place.
I've been here since about July 2007, and since being here between our current mayor and our last mayor, I've seen a number of trips done by both the mayor and the Chamber of Commerce to other cities to see what they're doing right and what could we incorporate here. Do you feel like those trips over the years that you've been here, have they generated anything fruitful?
I like to call myself the oldest living Confederate widow of downtown. Because I have actually been living downtown or in the environs since 1987, the year that the landing was opened. So I've seen these blue ribbon commissions come. I've seen them go. I've seen groups of bourbon-swilling architects replaced by beer-swilling rednecks, replaced by bourbon-swilling attorneys. They all have, and they mean well. They mean so well. And I've sat and I've talked with them. I've believed in their causes. I have helped to argue for the stuff that has been done since 1987, which I guess is 20 years now? 20?
Yeah, just over 20 years.
Long time. And it doesn't work because it's too small of a group. If we want the city to come back, we have to do what the other cities did. You can't just go and go, well, by God, we need an aquarium here in the River City by the sea because none of our locals have ever seen sea life. Well, okay, that worked in Nashville or it worked into Chicago, but come on, it's Florida. We've seen sea life. Usually in a very adversarial kind of a way because you immediately have to like urinate on it to make the sting go away. I mean, we're used to all that. So I think it would be awesome to travel more for our leadership. But more than that, the citizens have to be involved. People have to take charge of their quality of life. I mean, this is your city. It's your life. You have to make it worth living in. And you can't trust some guy just because, he's an attorney to be able to make decisions for what should be a complex, self-organizing, beautiful organism called a microeconomy in the downtown.
And as you said, though, that even in our infrastructure, there's parts of Jacksonville that are so divided and so divisive. And even just talking to people in the community, you can get the sense that some people really do want to live in a diverse community while others staunchly do not. So then how do you get all those different people with different backgrounds? And Jacksonville is a pretty diverse city when you look at who really is our chemical makeup. How do you get all those different people to really come to the table? Because it's hard getting people to buy into things, just getting them to come to a city council or a school board meeting.
I think Milton Friedman is a fraud and an idiot. But I think there is one, he made great points. And there is an invisible hand of the market. And all things being equal, people generally make the best choices for their self-preservation. Sometimes you get a little bit out of hand. Some regulation is necessary. But I think you don't have to have people buy in because what is not working for Jacksonville isn't that we need to spend more money. We need to be wiser about how our taxation policies impact these really daily things. Like, we went to the We went to the WOKV event with Andy and Carl Rove
and Neil Bortz.
Oh, yeah.
And Herman Cain.
Yep, him too. And you know what? We got jacked for $20 for parking in an abandoned downtown with one freaking thing open, and that was the Times Union Performing Arts Center. So It's not that way any other night of the week. The night before we had been, or the week before we had been to Beauty and the Beast, it was only $10. The parking situation downtown is out of control. Like we're letting parking lot guys make the decisions down there. We have to make an even playing field. If you let everything be equal, if you allow for people to build downtown, if you stop penalizing them for coming there, if you take away these artificial landmark blocks, it will thrive. It doesn't need buy-in. It's perfectly located. There's museums, there's the symphony, there's a river, there's big buildings. It's surrounded by history. Get the hell out of it and let the market come in, and it will come back by itself.
And you were also touching on the subject of race not too long ago. So talk to me about white flight.
Well, Jacksonville is a very surprising place, and it has its history. For the first 250 years of people settling here, it was a black majority here until 1901. It was almost 3/4 of this area was African American. Even the plantation owners were African American here. It was a very racially diverse place. Even up until the 1940s, over 100 languages were spoken along Bay Street at all of the shops and all of the places. We were a tourist place. Steamships came from all over the country to connect into the downtown Jacksonville, and there were passenger railroads that took them to the rest of the country. So you were connecting international travelers with American travelers, right? So if you can imagine this very diverse place, this very wonderful place, which gave rise to, we were the place that named the blues. We had the Harlem Renaissance started in the La Villa neighborhood of Jacksonville. We have this very gorgeously tapestried, diverse history that has just been kind of covered up. So by the time you get into the 1930s, it's beginning to become a very racist place. So along with the rest of the country, by the 1950s, people have had a bellyful of the injustices and the cruelties of that system. And Jacksonville was as much a part of the civil rights movement as any other place in the country. Axe Handle Saturday, Stetson Kennedy, Alton Yates, some of the legends came through here and lived here and were from here. But then what changed about Jacksonville wasn't that there was white flight. In the 50s, we built toll bridges. And we created these toll bridges that allowed you to get over to the south side into Arlington. And it created kind of a traffic jam. So if you didn't have a car, you couldn't go to those neighborhoods. If you didn't have enough money to pay the toll, you couldn't go to those neighborhoods. And if you didn't have time to go back and forth, you didn't go to those neighborhoods. So the traffic became so freaking horrible waiting for these tolls, not because the bridge was that busy, but the tolls were, that we created regional shopping areas like Regency Square. So it had the feeling of white flight. But in Jacksonville, it wasn't so much white flight as it was upper middle class flight. The African American and the white people moved out of the downtown core because it became a pain in the freaking bahonkus to live there. So it was easier to live in the suburbs. It was easier to build in the suburbs. Downtown was not destroyed by white flight, but the racist ideas of people on how to fix downtown did perpetuate and contribute to its ultimate downfall.
So we're looking at repairs to downtown that aren't just from the last 20, 30 years. We're looking at repairs that date back to the 1950s, the 1930s.
We have the longest history of boneheadedly stupid decisions of any city in the country. And there's a reason that we have a historic failure of our downtown. Do you know Detroit is usually the poster child for failed downtowns? Detroit is doing so much better than Jacksonville's downtown is. Really? 2,000 people in the 13th largest city in America? 2,000 people are living in the urban core?
So how do we go about fixing that? I mean, is there an answer that can quickly be made up within the next 10 years to resolve everything that has failed over the last 70?
You can do it in 2 years.
What's that?
Get rid of the parking meters. Get rid of that whole parking enforcement, or enforce it with the entire city. Change the zoning codes. Allow for small businesses to come back into the downtown without harassment. Get rid of the stupid one-way streets that make it impossible to take a left turn for a mile and a half. get rid of these blocks that keep the neighborhoods from being able to utilize the downtown. Those neighborhoods were what supported downtown for 100 years. Once we cut off access to those neighborhoods, downtown's retail failed. It was as simple as that.
Now, I can't believe we're already coming up on the end of our time. This has gone by so quickly, but I want to ask you quickly, maybe you can give me a 1-minute answer, your thoughts on Mayor Alvin Brown, what he's done so far, and basically what his plans are for the future.
Well, I campaigned for Mayor Brown. Metro Jacksonville campaigned for Mayor Brown. We thought he was a much better alternative than, his opponent. And I sat on his downtown transition committee, and Ennis Davis, who is another Metro Jacksonville guy, sat on the transportation transition committee. I think Alvin has a pretty good feeling for what needs to be done, but if I had to fault him for anything, I think he needs to broaden the number of people who are making decisions downtown and not go with the same nifty-50 whose boneheaded failures resulted in the catastrophe that we have down there. Really? You have all of this going on and you're going to solve that with a $400 million convention center? Okay, whatever.
Sounds like more needs to be done then. But hopefully we'll get you back on and we can discuss more of what needs to happen to resolve our growth issues here in Jacksonville. So where can people go for more information and more of the topics we're discussing today?
Well, you can go to the excellent website, www.metrojacksonville.com. And it's actually, the forums are new stuff. There's an ongoing daily lively discussion about these issues and about every part of town, not just the urban core.
All right. Well, it sounds like you are your best promoter. You did it a lot better than I could. Well, thank you again for joining me today, Stephen.
Thank you so much for having me, Tiffany.
All right. And I'm Tiffany Griffith, and you've been listening to First Coast Forum. Hopefully you can join us again soon. Thanks for joining us.
You've been listening to First Coast Forum, an in-depth look at critical issues in our community. If you have a comment or suggestion for First Coast Forum, please send an email to publicaffairs@coxradio.com. Tune in again next week for another edition of First Coast Forum, a production of Cox Radio Jacksonville.